The members' only sign meant nothing as white patrons streamed in, but when 68-year-old black veteran James Wilson approached, the owner blocked his entry. The next day, hundreds of uniformed military personnel lined the street outside the bowling alley. James Wilson had spent 30 years serving his country in the Marine Corps. At 68, his once straight posture had given way to a slight stoop, his dark skin now weathered and lined from years under foreign suns. Despite the physical toll of Vietnam and multiple tours overseas, his eyes remained clear and kind. Since retiring, James had settled in Fairview, a small town with a growing veteran community. His modest pension covered the basics, a small apartment and simple needs. He dressed plainly, favoring worn jackets and faded jeans that matched his humble demeanor. 3 times weekly, James volunteered at the local Veteran Support Center, helping younger veterans navigate benefits paperwork and offering a listening ear. His calm presence and wisdom made him beloved among those who knew him. The physical therapist had suggested bowling to help with James' shoulder mobility and provide social interaction. Though his gnarled hands sometimes struggled with the weight of the ball, he'd grown to enjoy the activity and the camaraderie it offered. James had experienced prejudice throughout his military career and civilian life. He developed a quiet dignity in response, never raising his voice, never showing anger. A true Marine maintained composure under fire, he often told younger veterans. Few in town knew of his Purple Heart or his acts of heroism. James never spoke of saving his entire platoon during a fierce ambush in Vietnam. His neighbors simply saw a kind, aging black man who nodded politely while walking to the bus stop. The Kingpin Bowling Alley had recently reopened after extensive renovations. With plush seating, cosmic bowling lights, and an upscale sports bar, it had quickly become Fairview's premier social venue. Owner Mike Peterson had invested heavily, determined to attract the right clientele. Veterans Day was approaching, and James had arranged to meet 4 fellow veterans for a few friendly games. They'd been planning it for weeks, a small celebration of brotherhood and service. James arrived early, wearing his cleanest jeans and a plain button-up shirt. His only concession to the holiday was a small veteran's pin barely visible on his collar. His fingers traced it nervously as he approached the entrance. "Excuse me," Mike stepped forward, blocking James' path. "Do you have a membership card?" James glanced at the entrance, where 2 young white couples were being welcomed without question. "I didn't realize a membership was required. How might I apply?" Mike looked James up and down, taking in his aged appearance and modest clothing. "We're at capacity for new memberships right now." His voice lowered. "This establishment caters to a particular clientele." "I see," James said softly. "When might memberships open again?" "Hard to say." Mike glanced meaningfully at a group of well-dressed patrons entering without pause. "The waiting list is selective." James understood immediately. It wasn't the first time, wouldn't be the last. The familiar ache of rejection settled in his chest, but his expression remained neutral. "Thank you for your time," James said with dignity. Turning to leave, Mike called after him. "There are other bowling alleys across town that might be more suitable for you." James nodded without turning back, his stooped shoulders carrying the weight of yet another dismissal. "Wilson, Sergeant Major? Is that you, sir?" The voice stopped James at the edge of the parking lot. A young man in civilian clothes jogged toward him, his military bearing unmistakable despite the casual attire. "David Thompson." The young man said, coming to attention out of habit. "You probably don't remember me, but you led my support group last year after I returned from Afghanistan." James smiled warmly. "Of course I remember you, son. How's that college program working out?" "Excellent, sir, thanks to your guidance." David noticed James' retreat from the bowling alley. "Were you leaving? I thought you loved bowling." "They're at capacity today," James explained gently without bitterness. David frowned, glancing toward the entrance where people continued to enter freely. "That doesn't seem right." Their conversation caught the attention of 3 men exiting a nearby car, all wearing veteran caps from different branches. "Everything okay here?" asked the tallest, approaching with concern. David explained the situation, his voice rising with indignation. "This is Sergeant Major Wilson." He saved an entire platoon at Key Sand, earned the Purple Heart and Bronze Star. The three veterans exchanged glances of disbelief. The James Wilson asked one, removing his cap respectfully. "Sir, your actions during the Easter offensive are taught at military academies. It's an honor to meet you." Inside the bowling alley, Mike had been watching the gathering with growing unease. He stepped outside, his demeanor suddenly accommodating. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," he offered smoothly. "We could certainly make an exception for a distinguished guest." James straightened slightly, decades of military bearing momentarily overcoming his stooped posture. "Thank you, but I believe I'll pass the day." "Sir," David protested, "you shouldn't have to." "It's all right, son," James said quietly. "Some battles aren't worth fighting." The three veterans looked at one another, then one by one removed their bowling shoes and handed them to a confused attendant. "If Sergeant Major Wilson isn't welcome," one stated firmly, "then neither are we." They flanked James as he walked away, a small honor guard of solidarity. 2 hours later, David sat fuming in the local veteran center, recounting the incident to anyone who would listen. By evening, the story had spread through text messages, veteran forums, and social media groups. They turned away James Wilson? The disbelief was universal. In a back office, retired Colonel Marcus Reynolds, head of the Regional Veterans Association, made phone calls. His voice, still carrying the command presence from 28 years of service, brooked no argument. "Yes, that James Wilson. Vietnam. Purple Heart. The man who carried 3 wounded through sniper fire." A pause. "Tomorrow, 1,400 hours. Dress uniform for active duty. Veteran insignia for the rest." At his small apartment, James answered a knock to find Colonel Reynolds and 5 other veterans on his doorstep. "With respect, Sergeant Major, we need to discuss what happened today," Reynolds said. James invited them in, embarrassed by the modest surroundings and the television tray that served as his dining table. "It's nothing new, Colonel. Not worth disturbing yourselves over." A young female Navy veteran leaned forward. "That's exactly the problem, sir. It shouldn't be something you've gotten used to." "We're not proposing a protest," Reynolds clarified, noting James' concerned expression. "Nothing unbecoming of our service." "Then what?" James asked. "Education," said another veteran. "A reminder of who serves his country, what we look like, and the respect that's earned." James shook his head. "I don't want special treatment." "Not special," Reynolds corrected. "Equal, and not just for you. For the black veteran who will walk in there next week. For the young Hispanic Marine home on leave. For every service member who deserves to be judged by their character." James considered this, looking at the earnest faces around him. Different ages, races, branches of service, all united. "This isn't about embarrassing anyone," David added. "It's about standing together, like we did in uniform." The female veteran smiled. "Besides, sir, when a commanding officer suggests a mission," James chuckled despite himself. "It's generally advisable to comply." He sighed. "All right, but with dignity and discipline. Would we do any other way?" Reynolds asked as texts and calls went out across 3 counties. The next afternoon was busy at Kingpin Bowling Alley. Mike Peterson moved between lanes, pleased with the day's receipts. A large corporate group had reserved 6 lanes, and weekend regulars filled the rest. At precisely 2 p.m., the front doors opened, and 2 Marines in dress blues entered. They stood at parade rest near the entrance, drawing curious glances. Minutes later, 4 Army veterans arrived, taking positions behind the Marines. Then came 3 Navy officers, followed by an Air Force captain and 2 enlisted personnel. "What's happening?" Mike asked his assistant manager, watching as more military personnel arrived in a steady stream. By 2:30, over 50 uniformed service members stood in a disciplined line that extended from the entrance into the parking lot. They spoke little, maintaining military bearing despite the growing crowd of onlookers. "Should we call the police?" the assistant manager whispered. Mike shook his head, mesmerized by the silent formation growing outside his business. These weren't protesters with signs and chants. These were disciplined ranks of military personnel, standing at ease as if awaiting inspection. A local news van pulled up as the line stretched around the building. The reporter looked bewildered at the quiet assembly. Men and women of various ages and races, some in current service uniforms, others wearing veteran caps and insignia, all standing with the unmistakable posture of military training. By 3 o'clock, the line numbered in the hundreds, extending down the block. Regular customers couldn't reach the entrance, standing awkwardly at the edges of the gathering crowd. "This is getting out of hand," Mike muttered, pushing through the doors. "What is this about?" No one in line acknowledged him. The discipline was absolute. Each person looking straight ahead, hands clasped behind backs or at their sides. Word spread quickly through the watching crowd. "They're here for the veteran who was turned away." "Which one?" someone asked. "The old black Marine. Someone said he saved a whole platoon in Vietnam." Mike felt sweat beading on his forehead as more people gathered. He noticed police officers arriving, but rather than dispersing the assembly, they stood respectfully at its edges, 2 officers quietly saluting the formation. A murmur passed through the crowd as a van pulled up. Volunteers from the Veterans Center helped an elderly man from the passenger seat. Mike's heart sank as he recognized James Wilson, now transformed. Though still stooped with age, James had donned a dress shirt with military precision press creases. On his lapel gleamed medals that told of courage and sacrifice in a war many had forgotten. Colonel Reynolds escorted James toward the front of the line, and hundreds of hands snapped to salute. James walked slowly but with purpose, his weathered hands gripping a simple wooden cane. Despite his stooped posture, there was unmistakable dignity in his bearing. The Purple Heart and bronze star on his chest caught the afternoon sunlight. As he approached the entrance, the assembled military personnel held their salutes with perfect discipline. The gesture, hundreds of hands raised in unison to honor one elderly black veteran, created a powerful visual statement without a single word spoken. Colonel Reynolds stepped forward. "Mr. Peterson," he addressed the bowling alley owner, who stood frozen at the entrance. "May I introduce Sergeant Major James Wilson, United States Marine Corps retired, one of the most decorated Marines of the Vietnam era." The silence was profound as James reached the front of the line. He nodded to the assembled service members, who lowered their salutes in perfect synchrony. "I didn't come here for myself," James said, his voice soft but carrying across the now silent parking lot. "I came for every service member who has ever been judged by appearance rather than character." He gestured to the diverse line of uniformed personnel. "We come in every color, from every background. On the battlefield, we bleed the same. We serve the same flag. We deserve the same respect." James turned toward the growing crowd of civilians. "This isn't about one man or one business. It's about remembering that freedom requires both sacrifice and understanding." Reporters' cameras flashed as James spoke, his simple eloquence more powerful than any rehearsed speech. "We're not here to demand or threaten," he concluded. "We're here to educate, to remind our community that veterans don't fit one image or profile. We're your neighbors, your family members, your friends." The civilian crowd began to applaud, the sound building until it echoed through the parking lot. Many wiped tears, moved by the quiet dignity of the demonstration. Through it all, James stood straight, temporarily setting aside the physical burden of his years, embodying the strength that had carried him through war and peace alike. Mike Peterson had prided himself on being unshakable in business decisions. Yet as he surveyed the hundreds of military personnel standing in disciplined formation, something crumbled within him. He noticed the diversity in the ranks, young and old, men and women of every race and background. All stood united in perfect formation. All had come to honor one elderly black veteran whom he had dismissed without thought. The contrast between his behavior and their solidarity struck him with the force of revelation. These people had risked their lives for principles he claimed to uphold, but had failed to practice. With television cameras rolling and hundreds of eyes upon him, Mike stepped forward, visibly trembling. "Mr. Wilson," he began, his voice breaking. "Sergeant Major Wilson," he corrected himself. "I owe you an apology that words can't adequately express." The parking lot fell silent as Mike struggled to continue. I judge you by your appearance, not your character or your service. I dishonored everything the uniform stands for. James regarded him steadily, neither accepting nor rejecting the apology. I've never served, Mike admitted, never understood what it means to put others before yourself. I've been wrong. He looked at the assembled veterans. About many things. His voice strengthened with resolve. I can't undo yesterday, but I can change tomorrow. This establishment will welcome every veteran, regardless of appearance or background. That's my promise to all of you. He extended his hand tentatively. I don't ask for forgiveness I haven't earned, but I do ask for the chance to learn and do better. For a long moment, James simply looked at the offered hand. The assembled military personnel remained motionless, awaiting his response. Finally, James reached out and clasped Mike's hand firmly. In the Marine Corps, James said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, we believe in transformation, in the possibility that people can become better than their worst moments. The handshake, captured by news cameras and dozens of phones, will become a defining image of the day, an elderly black veteran extending grace to the man who had rejected him. 1 month later, the Kingpin Bowling Alley hosted its first Veterans Appreciation Night. James Wilson rolled the ceremonial first ball down a lane specially modified for those with mobility challenges. The crowd erupted in cheers as he knocked down 7 pins. Mike Peterson had made good on his promise. A wall of honor now displayed photographs of local veterans. Staff underwent training on inclusivity and military cultural awareness. Every Wednesday, veterans bowl for free. The transformation extended beyond one business. Other local establishments began implementing veteran-friendly policies. The high school invited James to speak about his service, leading to a community-wide oral history project documenting veterans' experiences. Most significantly, the Regional Veterans Affairs Office reported a 40% increase in older black veterans seeking benefits they'd previously foregone, inspired by James's story to finally claim the recognition they deserved. James himself remained unchanged by the attention. He still wore his simple clothes, still volunteered 3 days a week, still lived in his modest apartment. The only difference was the growing number of veterans who sought his guidance, and the respectful nods he now received throughout town. You've started something important, Colonel Reynolds told him during their weekly coffee meeting. James shook his head. Not me, all of us together. That's the point, Reynolds smiled. That's exactly what people needed to see. That when one veteran is disrespected, hundreds stand ready to step forward. It's how we've always operated. Together, James agreed, raising his coffee cup in salute. This story reminds us that respect transcends appearance and age. Have you encountered veterans like James in your community? Share your thoughts in the comments about how we can better recognize our aging heroes. If this story moved you, subscribe for more tales of courage, dignity, and the power of standing together against injustice.